Blue lights hit your rearview mirror, and in that split second, everything changes. Your hands tighten on the steering wheel, your mind starts racing. Was I speeding? Did I miss a sign? Why are they pulling me over? You glance at the clock, then back at the mirror. The patrol car stays close. No siren, just those flashing lights quietly telling you to pull over now. You slow down, signal, and stop. The engine is still running. Your heartbeat isn't. Then the officer steps out. Let me ask you something right now, and I want you to be honest with yourself. Have you ever been pulled over and felt like the situation changed the moment you started asking questions instead of just answering them? If you have, I want you to share that experience in the comments, because what you felt in that moment matters more than you might think. And stick with me, because there's a part of this situation that most drivers completely misunderstand, and it can turn a simple stop into something far more serious without you even realizing it. Here's where things get real. Most people believe traffic stops are simple. You get pulled over, the officer tells you what you did wrong, maybe writes a ticket, and you leave. That's the clean version, the version people expect. But in reality, traffic stops are dynamic, unpredictable, and often psychological interactions where every word, every pause, every movement matters. And the moment you shift from answering questions to asking them, the tone can change instantly. Let's walk through a scenario. The officer approaches your window. You roll it down halfway, not all the way. That's already something they notice. Your hands are visible, resting on the wheel. Good, that helps. Good evening, do you know why I pulled you over? That question right there is one of the most misunderstood parts of any traffic stop. It sounds simple, almost casual. But it's not just small talk, it's an assessment. If you say, "No, officer," that tells them one thing. If you say, "Was I speeding?" that tells them another. If you immediately respond with, "Why did you pull me over?" now the dynamic starts shifting. Not because asking questions is illegal, it's not, but because from the officer's perspective, they are now dealing with someone who may be challenging their authority, testing boundaries, or trying to control the interaction. And that's where things start to tighten. Now imagine this continues. The officer repeats, slightly firmer, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" You respond again, "I'd like to know why you stopped me." There's a pause, not a long one, just enough. But in that pause, something changes. The officer is now making decisions, not just about the traffic violation, but about you, your attitude, your level of compliance, whether this stop will stay routine or escalate into something more involved. This is where many drivers make a mistake without realizing it. They think they are standing up for themselves. They think they are being assertive or protecting their rights. But what they're actually doing, in that moment, is introducing friction into an interaction that heavily depends on cooperation, timing, and perception. Let me be clear about something important. You absolutely have the right to ask questions. You absolutely have the right to understand why you were stopped. But rights and outcomes are not always the same thing. And this is where people get caught off guard. Because when an officer feels that the situation is becoming less predictable, they start slowing things down. They might ask for your license and registration, then hold on to them longer than usual. They might return to their vehicle and run additional checks. They might call for backup, not because you did anything wrong, but because they want another officer present in case things escalate. Now you're sitting there, watching time pass, wondering why something so simple is taking so long. It didn't start with anything dramatic. It started with tone. Let's go deeper. Officers are trained to look for patterns, nervous behavior, inconsistent answers, unusual movements. But they also pay attention to conversational behavior, how quickly you respond, whether you interrupt, whether you comply smoothly or resist verbally. So when someone starts asking repeated questions early in the stop, especially before providing basic documents, it can trigger a mental shift. Why is this person trying to control the conversation? Are they hiding something? Are they preparing to argue or resist? Now, are those assumptions always fair? No, but they are real, and they influence how the officer proceeds. Here's another scenario that happens more often than people admit. The officer asks for your license, registration, and insurance. You respond, Before I give you anything, can you tell me why you pulled me over? That right there is a turning point. Because now, from the officer's perspective, you're delaying a basic request. You're creating a condition, and that can quickly be interpreted as non-compliance, even if your intention is simply to understand the reason for the stop. And this is where things can spiral. The officer might repeat the request, this time more direct. "Sir, I need your license and registration." You hesitate again. Now the officer has to decide whether to escalate the situation. Do they give you another chance? Do they issue a command instead of a request? Do they step back and reassess? Or do they call for backup because they're no longer comfortable handling the stop alone? This is how small moments turn into bigger ones. Now let's talk about something that most people don't realize until it's too late. Silence. You've probably heard that you have the right to remain silent, and that's true. But silence during a traffic stop is not always interpreted the way people expect. Imagine the officer asks, "Where are you coming from tonight?" You decide not to answer. There's a pause. The officer looks at you. You look straight ahead. They ask again, slightly different. "Just trying to understand where you're headed. Mind telling me where you're coming from?" You stay silent. At this point, the officer is no longer just gathering information. They're evaluating behavior. Silence can be interpreted in many ways. Maybe you're exercising your rights. Maybe you're nervous. Maybe you're hiding something. The officer doesn't know, and uncertainty makes people cautious. Cautious officers take fewer risks. They ask more questions. They take more time. They may expand the scope of the stop. Now combine silence with questioning. You don't answer their questions, but you ask your own. Am I being detained? Why are you asking me that? Is that relevant to the stop? Now the interaction becomes layered. And here's the part most drivers never think about. Timing. It's not just what you say, it's when you say it. There's a difference between asking a question early in the stop versus later. There's a difference between complying first, then asking, versus refusing first, then questioning. Those differences shape the entire interaction. Let's talk about another situation that often confuses people. The officer asks you to step out of the vehicle. A lot of drivers instinctively push back here. "Why do I need to get out? I didn't do anything wrong. I'd rather stay in my car." Here's the reality. In most cases, officers are legally allowed to ask drivers to step out of the vehicle during a traffic stop. But again, this is where psychology comes in. If you respond with resistance or repeated questioning, the officer may interpret that as a sign of potential non-compliance or even risk. Now their focus shifts from a traffic violation to control and safety. They might change their tone. "Sir, step out of the vehicle now." That shift in tone is not random. It's a response. And once that tone changes, it's very hard to bring things back down. Now let's address something that doesn't get talked about enough. Passengers. Passengers often think they are just observers, but they can influence the entire stop. Imagine a passenger starts asking questions while the driver is being addressed. "Why did you pull us over? Do you have probable cause? Are we being detained?" Now the officer is dealing with multiple voices, multiple directions, and a loss of conversational control. This increases tension. Even if the driver is calm, a questioning passenger can escalate the situation quickly. And yes, officers notice who is speaking, who is interrupting, and who is staying quiet. All of it matters. Now let's get to the core issue behind the title. They called police when he started asking questions. That kind of situation doesn't happen out of nowhere. It usually starts with a shift in tone, followed by repeated questioning, followed by hesitation or perceived resistance. At some point, the officer decides they need backup. Not necessarily because a crime has occurred, but because the situation no longer feels routine. And once backup is called, everything changes. More officers arrive, more eyes, more interpretations, more potential for misunderstanding. What could have been a 5-minute stop turns into 20. And during those extra 15 minutes, more questions are asked, more observations are made, and more opportunities for mistakes appear. Now let's talk about one of the biggest misconceptions people carry into traffic stops: the idea that asserting your rights will always protect you in the moment. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Rights are strongest in court, not always on the roadside. On the roadside, behavior, perception, and timing often matter more than legal arguments. That doesn't mean you don't have rights. You do. But how and when you exercise them can change everything. If you challenge too early, you might escalate. If you comply too much without awareness, you might give away more information than necessary. So where's the balance? It's in controlled communication. It's in understanding that you can comply with basic requests while still maintaining awareness of your rights. It's in knowing when to speak, when to stay quiet, and when to ask questions in a way that doesn't create unnecessary tension. Let me give you a practical example. Instead of immediately asking, "Why did you pull me over?" before handing over documents, you provide your license and registration first. Then, calmly, you ask, "Officer, could you tell me the reason for the stop?" Same question, different timing, different tone, different outcome. That's the difference most people miss. Now let's talk about something that catches drivers off guard all the time. Officers repeating the same question. "Where are you coming from?" You answer. A few minutes later they ask again. Same question. Why? They're checking consistency. They're watching your reaction. Do you hesitate this time? Do you change your answer slightly? Do you seem irritated? Every response gives them more information. Now imagine you start questioning why they're repeating themselves. Didn't I already answer that? Why are you asking again? Now the interaction becomes defensive. And once it becomes defensive, it becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability is what officers try to control. Another subtle moment that matters is how long your documents are held. If the officer takes longer than expected, people start getting anxious. They start wondering what's happening. Some drivers roll down the window and call out, "Is everything okay? What's taking so long?" Again, not illegal, but it adds pressure to the situation, and pressure changes behavior on both sides. Now let's address a situation that many people mishandle. The officer returns your documents but continues asking questions. At this point, the stop might technically be over, but the conversation continues. "Do you have anything illegal in the vehicle? Mind if I take a look?" This is where people get confused. They think they have to keep engaging. They think they can't leave. They think asking questions here will clarify things. But this is one of those moments where hesitation, tone, and clarity matter more than anything. Because if you don't clearly understand whether you're free to go, you can stay in a situation longer than necessary. And the longer you stay, the more opportunities there are for things to go sideways. Now think back to the original idea. Someone starts asking questions, the tone shifts, backup is called, the stop expands. That chain reaction is real, and it happens more often than people think. Not because asking questions is wrong, but because how those questions are asked, when they're asked, and how they're perceived can change the entire trajectory of the stop. So the next time those blue lights appear behind you, remember this. You're not just being evaluated for a traffic violation, you're being evaluated as a person in that moment. Your tone, your timing, your behavior, your reactions, all of it is being processed in real time. And the smallest shift can take the situation in a completely different direction. That doesn't mean you should be afraid. It means you should be aware. Because awareness is what keeps routine stops from becoming something else entirely. And once you've seen how quickly things can shift just because someone started asking questions, you'll never look at a simple traffic stop the same way again.